Elizabeth Husserl, welcome to the Orgasmic Lifestyle Podcast. It's a real pleasure to have you here. For those who are unfamiliar with your work, could you tell us what you do?
Yeah, thank you, Venus. It's a pleasure to be here.
Mhm.
So I'm so many things. Don't we wear lots of different hats? But generally speaking, I work with people and their relationship to money. So both as a financial advisor, investment manager, co-founder of a boutique firm here in the Bay Area in California, but also like a deep kind of money therapist. Some people have called me a money curandera, right? This feeling of really diving in and understanding money connected to our experience of wealth.
I love the term money therapist. I think a lot
Yeah.
of people need that.
Oh, I mean, 100%, right? And as the saying goes, you teach what you most need to learn. So it's like,
Absolutely.
why don't we talk more about this?
So what inspired you to follow this path?
I've always had a foot in two worlds. I love numbers and math and spreadsheets, and I love deep spirituality, sexuality, just life vitality. And so I was like, how can these two things come together? So for 20 plus years, I've been getting all the hard skills I need to kind of do my day job while still very much rooted in a much more holistic perspective. And so, both through my travels, I've lived and worked abroad in Mexico and Latin America. I have a master's degree in psychology that complements my degree in finance, like always looking for many different angles to approach a dicey subject at times.
Mhm. It's interesting because you have this practical background of
Yeah,
financial advising, yet the book is very holistic. It's kind of quite
yeah,
energetic. So tell us about
yes.
that.
Yeah, well, I mean, to some extent, there is so much already written in my industry around, financial literacy, right? And amazing books, which I highly recommend to so many of my clients that I use myself. But what I wanted to do was to be a thought leader and to bring a different voice.
Mhm.
So I, on purpose, wrote this book about our relationship to money, not including any analysis on numbers. Like that was intentional and if you can, when you're reading the book, there's a lot of little moments of mini moments of questions that I ask for yourself that, but also potentially to speak with your best friend or a partner or your families, because there's this misnomer that we feel a lot of discomfort when we talk about money with each other. And a lot of it is because it puts us into the comparison of numbers, right? Do you make more than I do? Do you have more debt? Do you have more savings? And that comparison keeps us outside of the relationship around intimacy when it comes to understanding who we are in our relationship, not just to money, but to wealth. And so I wrote this book to give people a different doorway into the conversation with themselves and with the people they love.
So what is wealth? So we're just talking, we haven't mentioned the
Well,
name of your book. Your book is The
yeah.
Power of Enough. So what inspired you to write the book? So what is it about the power of enough?
Well, so I'll start by answering your first question. What is wealth? Wealth is a
Mm,
state of well-being, right? So wealth
mm,
is a state of well-being. Money is a tool and a resource, and those two things get confused a lot, right? So
mm,
what inspired me to write the book is when I graduated from economics back in oh gosh, forever ago. I One of my favorite professors was a woman from Peru, Dr. Quispe, and I was fascinated by the idea of like, oh, can we do economic theory differently in a different country? I'm Latin, Colombiana. And so
mm.
I went and worked in Oaxaca for 2 years, Oaxaca, Mexico. And I was hired to go teach indigenous women how to create savings and loan cooperatives, right? To help them find financial agency amongst themselves. And after 2 years, they taught me just as much as I taught them. And what they exposed me to was that they had a different experience of wealth, right? Even though there was material poverty that I was there to help create solutions for, they had wealth when it came to their relationships with each other, their relationships to community, their ritual practices, their relationship to nature. They felt joyful. And I was like, huh, that's so interesting. Back in the States, and I think in the modern world, economics is viewed through this lens of scarcity, right? And so
Mm.
we're always looking for more. Whereas there, I was there to teach strategies to come out of material poverty, but they felt joyful and they felt connected to wealth as a state of well being. So that just opened my eyes in my early 20s. I'm like, there's something there that we're missing as a greater society that I want to just dedicate my life to.
So I think people think of wealth and just have material wealth,
Yeah.
and that's kind of what people go for to kind of feel safe, I guess, sometimes. Would you say that's true?
Oh,
Mm,
100%. I mean, that's
mm,
what we're taught, right? And so
mm,
we're taught that our path to wealth is linear, right? You make more money, you buy a house, you create savings, and all of that is really important. I really want to emphasize this. I even start the book by saying, hey, this is not about depth or wealth, right? It's not about having to choose, am I going to like work on my personal transformation or am I going to work on creating more financial assets? This is both and, right? They
mm,
happened together. And I actually treat money as a guide, as a spiritual teacher. It's really important to have money as a resource in our path of transformation. But what happens, right? And halfway into the book, I talk about this is that if we start to look at wealth more holistically and place it as a wealth mandala, right? Mandala is a
mm,
Sanskrit word for circle that is based on our human needs. And we throw out the window this idea if I'm needy or not, right? It's like, no,
mm,
human needs are universal. The way we satisfy them is unique and personal. One of the human needs is financial stability. And there are so many amazing things you can do to build a stronger financial stability slice of the pie, right? You can grow your savings, you can earn more than you spend, you can create a safety net, etc. But notice that is one slice of the pie. And if that's your only focus, it comes at the expense of these other human needs that give you an experience of wealth, like connection and purpose and participation and belonging, touch, leisure, understanding, right? And what happens is that sometimes, as people kind of like lift their head, right, in their mid 60s, aka close to retirement, and be like, okay, I feel the financial stability slice of the pie, but oh my goodness, I'm actually deficient in these other areas. And they realized that they didn't quite diversify their wealth portfolio in a way where they were able to experience, embody, and be fulfilled by their wealth versus just collecting more numbers on paper.
yeah, I love how you mentioned touch quite a lot throughout the book because a lot of
100%.
people we're all touch starved, I would say. A lot of
Uh,
people, yeah.
100%. I mean, I'll never forget one of my most powerful conversations with a client, right? C-suite client in, a tech company here in the States, financially independent at 40, but still working because he loves what he does. We did the exercise of the wealth mandala. He's a 10 in financial stability. I did a great job. We're good.
Mm,
But he was a 2 in touch,
mm,
right? And so we had a really interesting conversation around, I told him, like, my work is half done. No, I would say my work is not done if I just say, hey, you're doing great in finance and I just let you be. Because the reality is that you're feeling lack, you're feeling poverty, and you're feeling scarcity, and something that's really important to you that is going to gnaw at your ability to truly feel wealthy. And then
mm,
we had a conversation around what are some strategies to meet touch. Because I'm like, go get some massage, right? Like I love
mm,
receiving touch. And when we started digging a little deeper, he's like, no, I don't like to get massages. I actually, if I really let myself touch what's there, I feel a ton of grief by my relationship to my mother. And I'm not actually able to go closer to my daughter, who's 2, and I'm feeling the lack of intimacy and touch with her. And I was like, ooh, there's some juicy stuff there, right? And who does he need in his world to help him get through that? But it's like it really catapulted us to what was actually causing scarcity in his life. It
mm.
wasn't lack of money, it was lack of being able to access touch with his 2-year-old.
So I think, but again, in society, there's a big loneliness epidemic now. So what
Oh,
strategies
100%.
would you recommend for to overcome the touch thing? 'Cause-
Yeah. And so I think loneliness is caused by different things, by for some people lack of touch, for some people lack of belonging, right? Lack
mm,
of connection. So you could, so I think part of it is, why I wrote the book and gave such a practical tool like the Wealth Mandala, which people can access for free on my website.
mm,
Literally, they can download it today and start to see, and what I have people do, and I'll answer your question in a second, is you take the wealth mandala, you look at these 12 needs, and there's a space for 2 needs that potentially I didn't say that are really important to you. Like I
mm.
have a big need for celebration, so that's one of my
Okay.
extra needs, right?
Mm,
But it's like my husband has a big need for transcendent, that's one of his. And so there's flexibility to also make it your own. But then you go on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 feeling really fulfilled, right? So a 9 and 10, I'm feeling really full in this bucket, even though it might fluctuate, and a 1 or 2 feeling I'm actually have a lot of lack in this bucket or in this slice of the pie. I tell people start there, go ahead and write the numbers and then color it in. And then I tell them to take a step back and just look at their wealth mandala with no judgment, right? Like much like if you were looking at a beautiful flower, their petals are always going to be imperfect, right? And yet we love the beauty of a flower. So to approach the wealth mandala of your life with that same gentleness and kindness and appreciation of beauty for just what is, and then you can turn towards a petal that maybe is a little more wilted or that perhaps you're feeling more scarcity and be like, what strategies can I bring to potentially fill this out a little bit so that I feel more connected to my community. I feel more connected to myself. I feel more in touch with my
Mm.
environment, right? And so for some people, that will actually be like, oh, I actually need to slow down and schedule a monthly massage so I can feel touch, especially if you're not in intimate relationships where you get touch met, or you may have to. I mean, I've trained my husband. Like, I'm like, I need my 15-second hug, right? And I can see him like resist for 5 seconds. And then he's like, okay. And I've had to ask for it, right? So you also have to really get clear on what you need and how you satisfy your needs. But I think once you start to kind of choose a need to start with, it makes it less overwhelming. Because the thing about loneliness is that it's like this blanket of emotion that just weighs us down. And we're like, where do I start?
Mm.
Funny enough, when I went through my book tour at the end of it, it was a total success. I would not have changed a thing. And it was the first time in my life that I started to feel a little bit of loneliness. I was like, whoa, that's new. I'm not a lonely person because I have a deep community. But I realized that all my book events put me on a 3 month just rat race of just events and meeting new people. I was like, oh, I need my ladies, right? And so I called
Mm.
up my ladies. I'm like, I need you all at my house ASAP within the next week. I just need to feel my people again, right? And so loneliness can just creep up on us, and we need to just be aware of what strategies we already have or we can add to our portfolio of wealth to diversify how our needs are met.
Something that's very original in your book that I loved was the conversation with money. Could you tell us about that?
Oh my God, it's my favorite
Mm.
tool. So it's a Gestalt chair exercise, a therapeutic exercise, which basically allows you to have a conversation with something that is either not in the room or potentially unique, in this case, money. And so the way it gets structured is that you pick a money object, right? For a lot of people, grab some cash from their wallet or a checkbook, or my younger generations pick up their phone and talk to an app, like whatever represents money to you. You have two chairs or two meditation cushions. You find the right distance, right? If you're like, I'm needing to hold money close, pull it closer if you're needing a little more space. And then you set a timer and you give yourself the opportunity. You get to go first. You set a timer for 5 minutes and you get to share what are the emotions you're feeling around money. I tell people, Venus, this is not about your money story. I have a whole
Mm.
other exercise for that. This is how are you feeling about it, right? And so I've heard everything under the sun where some people will sort of like, God damn it, money. Why are you so hard? And da, 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 da. Or some people be like, where have you been? Right? Or some people be like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you showed up, right? Like, how do you make it as personable as possible, as if money were someone who came and sat down in couples therapy with you? Once the timer goes off, money gets the opportunity to respond. So literally, you physically change chairs. You hold your money object on your lap. Money, you get to respond, right? And just share whatever you need to say for the 5 minutes. Timer goes off. You switch chairs again, you respond, then timer goes off, switch chairs, money gets the last word. And what's really interesting with this conversation is it helps you get to the nugget of what's the energetics behind your conversation with money. Like when I did my first conversation with money, I realized how judgmental I was, how angry I was at money, how I was grasping every time it came in because I didn't trust I was going to get enough of it. And beneath it came that actually I was starting a business, I was becoming an entrepreneur, and no one had taught me how to do that. And so I had this list of questions. And instead of getting clear on what my questions were and who to go ask, I was just grasping on every time money would come my way. And money was like, whoa, that is too much pressure, right? And so you can start to see how you participate in your money dynamics and what you need to take responsibility there. And even though nine out of 10 clients will always resist when we sit down and do this exercise. 10 out of 10 feel lighter.
So would you say, so when money's speaking, you're basically closing your eyes and kind of waiting for downloads? Would that be, is that how it
Yeah,
is? Mm,
exactly. Exactly. So you're waiting for downloads. And so I tell people, for some people, it's easier to talk it out. For
mm,
other people, you can journal it out if that's
mm,
easier, right? It's kind of like, uninterrupted flow. We're just like timer, I'm talking about me. And then timer goes off. I'm responding to what just got said, right? So it's talking to money. If that's too much of a stretch, it's like part therapy where it's two parts of you, the part of you that deals with the bill paying, the money, the taxes, and the part of you that's the spender. You know what I mean? And so you get to have this conversation between different parts of you or you and money.
interesting. How much do you think is environment has a part to play in our wealth consciousness?
What do you mean by environment?
Like, for example, even like geographical
Oh,
environment, your
yeah.
family. Like, for example, I live in Barcelona. I'm British, but I live in Barcelona.
Oh, I love
And
Barcelona.
yeah, it's amazing. But
Yeah.
there is this mentality of, since the euro came in, that salaries have not gone up from 1,000 a month, imagine. So it's a real scarcity mindset. And
Yeah.
I have I have an event called Conscious Connections, and another
Mm.
organizer left me a voice message saying there's going to be an organic food fair, and I'm going to wait until I get the free tickets before I post the event. Do you know how much the tickets are? €5. And you're thinking, wow, it's just this
Yeah.
mentality of saving every euro. And one of the reasons why I've come to New York is just to absorb the energy, the bigger
Yeah.
thinking, and I'm just wow, my mind is exploding right now. It's incredible. So honestly,
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I
yeah.
think, I mean, it's kind of like nature and nurture, right? Is
Mm,
like we come in with some of our money personalities and how we're nurtured or what's around us. What are the stories in the collective that we agreed
mm,
to? 100%. Like the US it's the land of opportunity, right? And
yeah.
so there's the sense of, yes, I didn't know how to be an entrepreneur, but if I figured it out, I can run, right? And
Mm,
so, I do agree with that. And interesting enough, I remember the first time I visited Barcelona,
mhm.
and it was August, right? And everything
Everything's
shuts
closed. Yeah.
down. I was like,
How
whoa,
does
this is
anything work here?
I mean, I couldn't get to a bank, right? Because like I went
Mm,
to the bank and like they're not there at 9. At 11, they're drinking coffee. And I was like, okay, can
siesta.
someone? Yeah, right. But there is also a quality of life that sometimes we miss out of in the States, right? Like there is the
Mm,
cafe culture, there is the dining together. I mean, and again, I don't want to necessarily romanticize it, but it is a different, like, so if I were to potentially do a wealth mandala of life in the States and a wealth mandala of life in Barcelona, there'll be areas where some cultures thrive in meeting some needs more naturally than others. So I think
mm,
that's a great, actually, I'd never thought about that, Venus. I like this idea of like doing your own wealth mandala and like being like, what does this look like in my environment? And I think that can sometimes help people make decisions around like, is this the best environment for me? Right.
mm,
To your point around like, I wanted to come to New York to get like a dose of vitality, right? And to be like, that vitality, and these are my words, you can use
mm,
your words, right? If that's a resource I want to drink right now and consume, which of my needs do I want to channel it towards? Do you see
mm.
that? And so
Yeah.
you can use that drive and that desire and that literally that satiation of like, when I can see you like walking out into the New York streets, the hustle and bustle, and literally swallowing and letting yourself consume this resource that is so abundant on
Mm,
the streets of New York, and literally let every single cell of your body just consume that vitality that is free in that moment, and then start to see what gets activated in
mm.
terms of any one of your needs, any one of your strategies, any one of the projects that you're working on, what gets activated because you took the time and you spent the money to come to New York and nourish yourself.
I think for me, my goal is to kind of eliminate that fear around spending and the fear around money in general. And I think that's obviously a freelance life, so there's a lot of,
Yeah.
uncertainty in that. So it's about having, comfort in the uncertainty. And also, I feel that here there's less fear, there's more focus on opportunity. And that's something that I really wanted to take away with me. Because I actually live in
Mm-hmm.
Barcelona, but my audience, my work is US based. So I'm working quite
Mm-hmm.
globally, which is incredible. but it's just really to
Yeah.
eliminate the fear, I suppose. That's why.
Well, and I think that's particular to you because I would say a lot of my clients right now actually just have gone through a period of
Mm,
fear because there has been, again, all the conversations on tariffs and inflation and all the stuff that's happening in the markets, right? And so the fact that you kind of arrived from a different fear environment and this feels different, right, is really interesting. And I would highly encourage you to take the time to embody and satiate and swallow and consume the energetics of what you came. Because I want to
mm,
say one really important thing here. Scarcity brain is real,
mm,
right? It's been proven. There's tons of books written about it. I made a big, a brief reference to it in my book, and so, and there's a reason for it. Scarcity brain, right? Our brains are analyzing, forecasting, looking, searching, visualizing, creating to survive, right? That is why
mm,
you and I are here having this conversation. We have, survived in our lives, and our ancestors have. So that's great. It has a role, but it can be very exhausting. And if it's allowed to go totally haywire, it can land us in fear and anxiety a little
mm,
bit too much. So the way to work with the scarcity brain by not judging it and also recognizing it has a role is to call in the wisdom of our other centers. And that's a lot of what I talk about in the book as well, your heart center and your body center. There's a lot of work around the heart center and gratitude, and that's a great way to offset scarcity. But what I really wanted to add to the conversation is that the wisdom of the body center is our ability to experience satiation. And I
mm,
think I didn't answer your first question. What
mm,
is the power of enough, right? The power of enough, right, is the compounding effect of moments of meaning that you have literally embodied, right?
mm,
When you take time to see what are you consuming, what are you producing, what are you exchanging, that creates a moment of meaning that you can feel in your body that reminds you you are enough and you have enough, and you build and let those moments compound like we compound interest, and you build that portfolio and that well of worthiness. That is the power of enough.
amazing. And I think also there's a fear of spending money. Like I think, when you're
Yeah.
on holiday, it's like, oh my God, how much is this in euros? Because obviously everything's
Yeah.
so much more expensive here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in New
Mm.
York, right? I mean, I live in California, so it's like I remember. But I think so like it's consumption itself, and you're not saying this, consumption is a neutral act. I think it's the quality of what we consume. And so, you know, and maybe you get to experience a day just so that you get to have the contrast, right? A day where you're like, okay, today is a conscious consumption day and I'm going to consume at this level. And then maybe today is a conscious consumption day, but I'm going to spend at a lower level, right? And you make conscious decisions to see what feels right, right? Maybe today is a day that I'm going to pack up my lunch and take it to the park and not eat out, not eat takeout. Maybe the next day is a day that I actually want to go and try this new restaurant because I'm networking with this amazing person, whatever. So I think if it's in relationship, so that when you do consume, you give yourself the permission to really embody the consumption, then you get the important data, right?
Mm.
Of what is consuming with fear versus without fear.
Mm. Yeah, I think for me, consuming without fear is it's just such a beautiful experience where you can just order things and not even know worry about what the price is within reason, of
Yeah.
course. But it's really
Yeah.
nice.
But you know what's interesting, Venus? I hear again, 9 out of 10 clients come into my office and they say, I want so much money, I don't have to worry about it. Right. And
But
it's a
then yeah.
feeling we all relate to, right? I'm like, I've had that feeling too. And I just kind of smile and I'm like, that doesn't solve the problem, right?
Mm,
Because, and I see it with my clients as they grow their assets, sometimes their worries become bigger and it becomes more complex. So I think that's not the end goal. The
mm,
end goal is not to have so much money you don't have to worry about it. It's almost like saying, I got so many husbands, I don't have to worry about what mood they're in, right? That's not
mm,
the end goal. Yeah, I could have many husbands, but it's really about whatever relationship I'm in, what's the quality of that relationship, right? How am I showing up in the relationship? How present, right? How am I dealing with, challenges? How am I celebrating successes? So that's more important.
definitely, definitely. So what's the biggest concerns from your clients then? What do you think is that do you any common challenges that you see?
Yeah, I mean, it's the common challenge or the common question is like, do I have enough? Right. Which is why I
Okay.
wrote the book, right? Like,
Uh,
do I have enough? And I see that at the full spectrum, right? Because again, and they often come to me wanting to do the financial analysis to answer that question, which is really important, right? I would say that's a lot of what I do. But if I only do the financial analysis, that doesn't solve for a them believing that the analysis is true, right?
mhm,
Enjoying the life that we've mapped out, right? Because that's an important one where I'm like, yes, you have enough, but they're like, why do I still feel poor? So
mhm,
that's why I wrote the book, is that if I'm being asked this question by every single client, how do I give them tools to start to expand how we think about enough, how
mm.
we experience wealth, and how we embody wealth.
Amazing. I've read a lot of books about money from an energetic perspective. And one of them is I love is happy money, money, receiving money from a happy source, giving to a happy
Yeah.
source. I have a whole shelf of books on the energy of money, but then I'm missing the next stage, which is the practical side. Do you have any tips on, because knowing how
Yeah.
to accumulate money, but then what do you do with it?
I'm actually looking behind me. There's a great book oh, here we go. This is a great starting book. Uh, Get a Financial Life. It
Uh,
is personal finance in your 20s and 30s. I think it applies to any stage in our life. But it's because it starts with the simple, practical, this is how the financial system work by Beth Koblinger, Kobliner. So I think this is a great one that just lays out how the financial system works. Um, I would
Amazing.
highly recommend it. Yeah.
Amazing. So what are you working on now after the book? Have you finished your book tour?
I finished the book tour. Now I'm working on keynote talks. So I'm excited.
Uh,
My first one's coming up just in 2 weeks. And so really, I'm working on keynote talks. I'm also working on, funny enough, I think where there's been a lot of excitement about the book is working with other financial advisors, teaching them tools that I'm using, especially a lot of female financial advisors resonate with the emotional literacy alongside the financial literacy, because it just allows them to have deeper, wider conversations. So that is a big piece. And, continuing to see what avenues the book opens and what conversations to be had. But I want to continue to share this message with as many people as I can.
yeah, because it can be very daunting when you don't really know, things about investment, and it's very
Yeah.
confusing. You just don't know
Yeah.
where to turn to.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And so, for example, in hearing that question, right, for you is like, it sounds like potentially your focus in 2025 is like, what are some of the strategies in my financial stability slice of the pie? Awesome.
Mm.
That is your focus, right? And like, it's can't be at the expense of everything else, but like, that is my focus. Here are my list of questions, right? Because sometimes we can approach money with the innocent archetype, which is like, I'm overwhelmed by the amount of questions I have. So I always tell
Mm.
people, don't start with the answers. Start with your top 20 questions, write them down, take a highlighter, highlight the top three, focus on those three. And
Mhm.
actually, there was a great podcast that came out with Mel Robbins and Lewis from the School of Greatness on making money easy. I haven't read his book yet, but there
Oh,
could be some
wow.
good practical tips. It literally just came out. So
Yeah, because
I highly
my practical
recommend.
tips, I actually a few years ago I went down to this to recycle some bottles of wine, and I was putting all the bottles in and I started adding up how much those bottles cost, and I thought, how can I
Yeah.
afford wine but I can't afford a massage? So
Yeah.
I actually gave up alcohol, nothing to do with money, but then I started a self-love bank account. So
Oh,
it was so cool. So I put 800 euros a month just for fun.
yeah.
So and it's kind of cool just to have that money to kind of get, not have the guilt and just think
Yeah.
this is holidays, this is restaurant meals, so it's not interfering with other expenses.
Yeah.
Mhm.
100%. It's the bucket approach, right? Is like
Yeah.
saying this bucket is for this bucket is for this bucket is for this. So that is often a great way to start, because then I think you said a key word, being able to use the bucket for the purpose it's meant to be without guilt. That
Yeah.
comes to the whole consumption piece of like, again, is the consumption actually nourishing me? Because I'm accepting of it versus if I feel guilt, I mean, there's like we all know like receiving a massage, if you're feeling guilty, you're tense, right? That's
Mm.
not going to feel good. So,
Yeah. Also in the past, I've traveled with not much money and just this absolute fear. If anything goes wrong now, I am so screwed. It's
mhm,
yeah, it's really bad. Yeah.
mhm.
So how can we embody this feeling of just peace with money then? Do you have any tips about that? Just
Yeah.
feeling,
So I would say a couple things is that again, if because there's so much to be said around the organization of money in your life, and it's really important. And if I want listeners to take away something, it's like do start also knowing what's coming in and what's coming out. So that's actually a
mm,
simple way to start a better relationship with money. Is just start tracking, right, with a non-judgmental way. You don't even have to make it kind of line up yet. Just track what do I spend on these variable categories like food, like entertainment, like subscriptions, like clothing, etc. And just start tracking. But as you hold money as a tool, right? Equally important is to start to create more awareness and self-reflection on what wealth means to you. And so an easy entry point, Venus, that I tell people they can start with is a 30-day satiation challenge. And what
mm,
I mean by that is that for the next 30 days, right, at the end of the day or the start of your day, usually the end of the day works better, have a journal on your nightstand. And before you grab your Kindle or a book that you're reading, take your journal and write down 3 things that satisfied you today, right?
mm,
Oftentimes, they're hard things that we did, like hard client conversations, or I finished a project, or I da 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 da. Sometimes it could be a nourishing meal, it could be a conversation, it could be an idea you had, like whatever it is for you. I mean, for me, I'm like when I go to Zumba class, I it makes my list. When I have these meaningful conversations, like you will make my list tonight, right?
amazing.
Like so
Mm,
so write that down. So your 3 things that satisfied you. And you do that for 30 days, right? Don't judge it, write them down. And then after 30 days, grab a cup of tea and in one sitting, read through everything you wrote and start to
mm,
see what are the threads, what are the themes, what are the similarities in your strategies, and be like, huh, okay, I actually know how to create wealth in my life. So let me take what's working and turn towards those areas perhaps in my life that aren't working. And how can I use kind of a flavor of the strategy to potentially build a sense of wealth in these other areas? And I tell people you can feel wealthier without adding one more dollar to your bank account. And
mm.
that's equally important than having your financial stability slice of the pie organized.
Amazing. A couple of questions I ask all of my guests. What is the book that changed your life?
I mean, I will say Soul of Money, which is by Lynn
Oh,
Twist, who wrote the foreword to my book. I read her book 20 years ago, and she introduced the concept of sufficiency. And
mm,
so, in all of my studies around economics, right, that was so drenched in scarcity, right, I was taught that economics was the allocation of scarce resources. And when I read Lynn Twist's book, I mean, again, in my early 20s, and she read about sufficiency and enoughness, I was like, whoa, what is this? And so she's been a mentor for 20 years. And I had just such a pleasure and joy of working with her closely this last year. And she got to write the foreword.
oh, that's amazing. Do you have any books that are around spirituality that have influenced you?
Oh my gosh, so many
Mm,
around spiritual. I mean, like back in the day, Seat of the Soul just like marked
mm,
me. I loved the 3 Conversations with God books. I loved I'm actually looking at my behind me. Uh you know, The Alchemist was an all-time favorite of just going back and reading that story at different stages in my life. But it's just so many.
mm. It's also from the spiritual perspective. If you brought up, religious, there's this idea
Yeah.
that money's really bad, but then in lots of spiritual worlds, it's about abundance and it's a good thing. So I think how do you see these coming together of
Yeah.
spirituality and money?
100%. I mean, so again, by separating money as a tool,
Mm,
it gives us space to have a more critical view that humans can
mm,
use money for good and for bad, right?
mm,
And so I'm really interested in our human relationship to power, right? Because we can use not just money, we can use authority, there's so many ways that we can misuse our relationship to power and use the different tools and resources. So I actually do not think money is evil at all. I think it's a
mm,
neutral tool that humans use in good and not good ways.
mm. So how is money a spiritual mentor then?
So, oh my gosh, a lot of times I feel like it's on my shoulder, just kind of like
Mm,
whispering to me. And so, again, I have a deep spiritual practice of working with spiritual guides, working with ancestors. And so for me, our relationship to money is a mirror into who we are, right? And so a lot of the tools that I talk about in the book, the conversation with money, literally you can feel like you're having a conversation with the spirit guide, right? Your money story, you can see it's a reflection into how you've showed up in perhaps some challenging parts in your life. And so our relationship to it can just shed light on what we need to take responsibility for. So that's how I see it as a spiritual tool for transformation. It shows us at our best and it shows us at our worst, and it can be brutally honest.
So how can someone stay grounded if they have a big, they receive lots of money, it's like through, some maybe professional or inheritance or something like that. How can,
Yeah, that's
is it,
that's a great question
mm,
because it's a shot of vitality, right?
yeah,
It's that same second chakra energy of like, oh
mm,
my gosh, I'm now overwhelmed by this energy. And so I think that's a great question. And so I think, even in just you asking it, Venus, is like, I think a part of it is that you really need to deepen whatever spiritual practice you have to stay connected to who you are. And there is something called the sudden wealth syndrome,
oh,
right? And it's like, and there's books on it, there's an institute on it, there's like a ton of information on this. But a general rule of thumb is that when you get that shot of vitality, right, is to not make impulsive decisions, right? To give money a home, and it can be in a high yield savings account. You don't have to make big decisions, and make sure you do what you need to do to feel grounded in who you are, right? So that, and then in my practice, what I do is that I bring them back to the wealth mandala and I say, before this happened, how were we designing your life? And what
mm,
areas were we focusing on? And now that we have just additional resources to work with,
mm,
how do we channel those additional resources to meet the needs that were important to you before that particular expression of money arrived? It's just energy,
mm,
right? And so to help it not corrupt you or change you, you just have to stay connected on who you are.
mm. Because I actually made a meditation recently, because I'm also a meditation creator, about exponential success. And I realized
Yeah.
through meditation that it didn't feel safe to me. Even though money is like a root chakra thing, it can be, financial stability. It could feel that this massive success could be, make can actually cause the opposite. So I was trying to, like, feel safety in my body and just trying to
A
embody.
hundred. Well,
Yeah.
that's the key piece, right? Is that I in the States, I don't
Mm.
understand why we do this, but we call investments securities. I was like, does anyone
Okay.
else hear how crazy that is? Right.
Well.
And so we've drunk the Kool-Aid, right? That
Mm,
investments in money equals security. And it feels very ungrounded because I feel then if that's the case, I'm only secure if I have more money, right?
mm,
And we know tracking the stock market, it goes up and it goes down, it goes up and it's down. An that's a tenuous source of security. True security, right, comes from really feeling grounded in yourself and knowing the vast array of resources you have access to, right? It could be relationships, it could be people, it could be your own resilience, right? That if the market goes up or if you lose a contract, you lose a job, you can still show up for yourself, right? And so I think that's really so as you think of exponential growth, right? It really has to come. I'm holding my second chakra. It has to be rooted in your ability to stay connected to source and
mm,
grow from there, knowing that resources are going to flutter in and out and there's no one dependency on a resource, right? Your exponential growth and your exponential success cannot be dependent on any one resource, including money.
amazing. What about a quote or affirmation that you live by?
I am enough, right?
Okay.
I
Mm,
live by that. There's actually two. I live by the affirmation, I am enough
mhm.
and I have enough. And also, I love my life. Like
Okay.
I've been saying that for a decade, and it's not every day, but I know what it feels like to love my life. And I repeat that often to myself because it allows me to know where I'm coming back to when I drift, right?
Mm,
When, I feel too far or I'm not doing the things that allows me to love my life, right? I then say that mantra. I'm like, oh, I know how to love my life. Let me come back and go back dancing because I haven't made time for
mm,
that, or go out for my walk, or call a friend, or sit in ritual, right? Or sit in front of my altar. I know the things that make up a meaningful life, right? And I know the times that I let myself overwork at the expense of doing the things that round out my experience.
Amazing. So where can people find you?
So I have a website, elizabethhusserl.com. That's Husserl. Ton of free resources there. And then on Instagram, so at Elizabeth Husserl, I post often pictures, stories, mini moments. So they can follow me on Instagram or just go to my website and connect and sign up. Um, Probably going to be starting a Substack soon so they can sign up for the newsletter there.
Amazing. Do you offer courses as well, like on online
I
courses and
I will. 2025 has been a year of focusing on the book and speaking, but I can
Mhm.
imagine they'll be coming in 2026.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so
I'm
much
letting
for joining
myself
us.
practice that I'm
Uh-huh.
doing enough. I said I'm letting myself
Okay.
practice that I'm doing enough.
There's another one to add is like I do enough as well. Because I think sometimes at the end of the day we're
Yeah.
thinking, I haven't done this, haven't done that. And we're always
Yeah.
thinking of the lack of what we haven't
Yeah.
achieved. Yeah. Amazing.
No, I'm doing enough. I got a lifetime.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me and enjoy New York.
I
I can't
will.
wait. Yeah, it's so fun.